Before I started working here, I knew the same thing everyone else knew, that the Boneyard was a place that airplanes came to die, and that was it. It was just a parking lot, and they sat out here for 10 years and then eventually became soda pop cans and razor blades and other useful items. Airplanes don't just come here to die. About a third of the aircraft that are stored as regeneration candidates are going to fly out again, for us or for our foreign allies.
There's old planes and new planes, jets and props, fighters and transports, fixed wing and wingless. Some are just taking a rest before rejoining their units. Others keep their brethren aloft by donating parts. A few have given all they can and are moving from the boneyard to the scrapyard. All the aircraft are here for a purpose, and each with its own story.
This airplane is a B-52H, and one of the changes to the later models of B-52, the G and the H models, was that the tail got shorter and fatter. One of the things they were doing to test this new vertical tail was flying back and forth on the eastern slope of the Rockies. This airplane in flight lost its tail, it broke off because of wind shear and turbulence, and the aircraft remained flyable thanks to the help of the Boeing engineers that were on the radio. And it flew back to Missouri where the weather was too difficult to land, so they subsequently went on to Arkansas. The airplane flew for 5 hours with no tail.
The aircraft here are under the care of hundreds of mechanics, engineers, technicians, and support staff of the 309th. And it's not a coincidence that they are here in the Sonoran Desert.
The Boneyard was established in 1947. It was picked primarily for two reasons. The climate is the first one. As you can imagine, storing all this metal, you want a dry climate so it doesn't corrode. The second reason is because of the ground. The 6 inches down from the normal ground is this thick clay, caliche, and that helps us stabilize the aircraft so that we don't have to put down concrete or any other kind of structure, and we can just roll the aircraft onto the ground. The oldest aircraft is a 1952 B-57 aircraft, and our newest aircraft are F-16s.
And there are lots of F-16s. Many, after being awakened from their desert slumber, pampered and updated, are being refurbished for flight. As with each of the thousands of planes here, the pilots often have the closest bonds to their battle mates.
It's an amazing airplane. They did a phenomenal job designing it. It's very simple to operate. It's a real pilot's aircraft. Being a small guy like I am, it's the first military aircraft. I've flown 7 different aircraft that actually fits me just fine. And it's an unbelievable combat performer. I've flown the aircraft in combat, and it's never let me down. And I think the aircraft that you spend the most amount of time in is usually the one you end up loving the most.
Prior to the F-16, the Phantom F-4 saw regular combat for the United States during the Vietnam War. There, during the 1960s and 70s, they engaged in dogfights with enemy MiG fighters. Some F-4s were flown off of aircraft carriers where they were stowed on deck right next to one another.
And the interesting thing about this airplane and its mate just over there is that they took off together from the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk on the 6th of May in 1972. Both of them were out over North Vietnam, and they were engaged by MiG-21s, and each of them shot down a MiG-21. So they were together that day, May 6th of 1972, and here they are 40 years later at the Boneyard, and they're 50 feet apart.
If these planes could talk, most of the tales they would tell would probably have to do with in-flight adventures, but not all.
This airplane is a modified C-130 called the LC-130, and it was modified to support our operations in Antarctica. It flew from New Zealand down there and would land on the snow and ice. You can see that it has skis instead of landing gear. And this particular airplane landed down there and then was getting ready to take off when the engine broke, and it caused some damage to the aircraft, so they ended up leaving it down there. It stayed 17 years in Antarctica and was covered by snow and ice. And eventually, the Navy decided to fly it out. So they took an engine down there, put it on the aircraft, flew it out, and it flew again back and forth between New Zealand and Antarctica for 10 more years before coming here for its well-deserved retirement.
Not every aircraft at the Boneyard had long, distinguished careers prior to their retirement here. A few served for just a short time, including a one-of-a-kind behemoth with a unique mission, whose first flight was in 2002.
This is the airborne laser. It's a modified Boeing 747 cargo aircraft and was used by the Ballistic Missile Defense Office to answer the question, hey, I wonder if we can detect, track, and engage ballistic missiles in the boost phase. The answer $2.5 billion later is yes. And if you see the other side of the aircraft, you'll see the scorecard that it has. The Ballistic Missile Defense Office did lose its funding because with elections, there are changes in priorities.
Less than 10 years later, the airborne laser flew its last flight here to the Boneyard. Understandably, it's the pilot and crew chief who keep the aircraft closest to their hearts.
It arrived on the 28th of July.
It hadn't been here a day or two before I got a hold of you then, I guess.
Let's go see your plane.
Jack Catalini is one of a very few Army pilots who flew jets. Jets flown into dangerous locations with special VIPs, senators, and Army bigwigs as passengers. Jack's Gulfstream was unmarked and undercover, disguised as your run-of-the-mill corporate jet.
It was a first for all of us. The Army never had jets. First time in something that can go up to 41,000 feet. Most of us spent our first half of our career flying helicopters. We never got more than about 1,500 feet off the ground. We've died and gone to heaven. This is as good as it gets for helicopter pilots. This was our last assignment. We had worked our way up. For me, at the end of that, it was 28 years in the military. We feel like they're ours no matter whether we're all retired or not. It just doesn't get any better. It's just a wonderful airplane to fly.
With each addition to the inventory, another tale comes to rest in this corner of the desert. And while the grounds of the Boneyard may become crowded, there's always plenty of room for the stories.